You already buy time. You've been doing it your whole life. Every time you pay someone to clean your house, you bought yourself 2 hours. Every time you take a taxi instead of walking, you bought yourself 20 minutes. Every time you order food delivery instead of cooking, you bought yourself 45 minutes. Rich people have been buying time for centuries. They buy it in the form of assistants, chefs, drivers, and people whose entire job is to do the things that would otherwise eat your day alive. The only difference between what we have now and the thought experiment I want to walk you through today is that right now you can only buy someone else's time. You can't buy more of your own. But what if you could? I mean, literally, buying extra years of your life on a market with a price tag and a checkout. There's actually a 2011 film called In Time with Justin Timberlake, where that's exactly how the world works. People are genetically engineered to stop aging at 25, and from that point on, time is the currency. You work to earn minutes and hours on your clock. You pay for your coffee in seconds, and if your clock hits 0, you just die right there in the street. It's a great film, and it's a surprisingly good blueprint for thinking about what a world like that would actually look like. The economics, the biology, the philosophy of buying time, all of it is weirder and more interesting than the movie had time to get into. Chapter 1. We already live in a time economy, sort of. The average person in the bottom 10% of income spends about 40% more time on basic survival tasks than someone in the top 10%. Cooking, commuting on slower public transport, waiting in longer queues at cheaper shops, navigating bureaucratic systems that wealthier people just pay someone else to handle. It's not just that rich people have more money, it's that they have more time. Because money and time in the world we already live in are basically the same thing with different labels. The people with the least time are also statistically the ones who would benefit most from buying more of it. A single parent working 2 jobs doesn't need a new productivity app. They need about 6 more hours in a day. And right now, there's no way to buy that. The market we have can move time around between people. You pay me, and I give you my hours, but it can't actually create new time out of nowhere. This is exactly the world In Time depicts. In the film, people in the slums are running on 24-hour clocks, scrambling every single day just to not die, while people in the wealthy zones have centuries stacked up, and they don't even know what to do with themselves. The filmmakers clearly had something to say about wealth inequality, and fair enough, because the analogy is not subtle. It's about as subtle as a freight train. But the reason it works as a film is that the emotional logic is immediately recognizable. You feel it, because most of us are already living some version of the 24-hour clock. The difference in our world is that nobody's born with an expiry date stamped on their wrist. Our clocks are hidden, running down quietly, and we don't get a live readout, which is either a mercy or a much more insidious kind of cruelty, depending on how you're feeling today. Chapter 2. What would actually happen if time went on sale? Okay, so let's actually build this out. Imagine tomorrow, some biotech company cracks the code on aging. They've got a treatment, it's clinically proven, it adds 15 years to your life in full health, 15 actual good years. And they're selling it. The first question, obviously, is how much? And the answer is a lot. Enough that only the wealthiest percent of people on Earth can afford it, which means that almost immediately, you've created a biological aristocracy, a class of humans who will outlive everyone else by 15 years, accumulate 15 more years of wealth and influence and compound interest, and then be first in line when the next treatment comes out, adding another 15 years on top of that. This is the part where In Time gets interesting, because the film understands that in a time economy, the rich compound. Every extra year they live is another year to earn more time, which means the gap between the immortal rich and the dying poor doesn't stay constant. It grows exponentially. A billionaire in the film's world doesn't just have more time than a factory worker. They have so much more time that the difference has basically become a different category of existence. One of them is immortal, the other is something else entirely. And here's what I think the film gets right, that a lot of people miss. The problem isn't just that the rich can buy time. The problem is that if time is a commodity, then death itself becomes a poverty issue. In our current world, everyone dies regardless of how much money they have. That shared mortality is one of the few things that cuts across every class boundary. Steve Jobs couldn't buy his way out of it. Neither could anyone else. But in a world where you can buy time, you've broken that last equalizer. And once you break it, the social contract that holds everything together starts looking very, very flimsy. Chapter 3. The biology is weirder than the economics. Here's where I want to go slightly off script for a second, because the science of actually extending human life is fascinating and also kind of hilarious in how complicated it is. Your body doesn't have one aging clock. It has about 40. There's cellular senescence, where old cells stop dividing but refuse to die and just sit there causing inflammation like a difficult house guest who won't leave. There's telomere shortening, where the protective caps on your DNA get a little shorter every time a cell divides, which is basically your body slowly running out of tape. There's mitochondrial decay, epigenetic drift, accumulated DNA damage, and at least a dozen other processes, all degrading at different rates in different tissues simultaneously. What this means is that buying time, biologically, is like trying to restore a very old, very complicated machine where every component is failing at a different speed, and some of the components are interdependent in ways you haven't figured out yet. Fix the telomeres, and maybe you get more cancer. Suppress senescent cells, and maybe you disrupt tissue repair. The body is very aggressively resistant to the idea of living longer than it was designed to. The researchers working on this, and there are a lot of them, very well-funded ones now, tend to describe it less like fixing a clock and more like trying to reprogram the clock while it's running, which is, to put it mildly, a crazy project. The optimists in the field think we might crack meaningful life extension within 50 years. The pessimists think we'll keep finding that every intervention has a catch, and that the body will keep finding new ways to age even as we patch the old ones. Both groups agree it's the hardest problem in biology, which does make you wonder about the timeline in Time, where apparently someone just solved it, and nobody in the film seems particularly interested in how. Chapter 4. The question nobody wants to answer. So let's say it works. Let's say the biology gets solved, the treatments exist, and buying time is possible. Here's the question I think is actually the most interesting one. Would you want to live forever? I mean, sit with it for a second. Not, would you like to live longer? Most people say yes to that. But forever. Or even just 500 years. 1,000. A lot of what makes human life feel meaningful is shaped by the fact that it ends. The urgency of it. The decisions you make because you can't do everything. The relationships that feel precious partly because they're finite. There's a theory in psychology called terror management theory, which basically argues that almost everything humans do, build, create, achieve, is in some way a response to the awareness of death. We make things that last because we don't. Remove death from the equation, and I don't know what you're left with. Maybe something richer and more expansive than we can currently imagine. Maybe something that just feels very, very long. In Time actually gestures at this in a throwaway scene, where one of the immortal rich characters admits they're bored, centuries old, more time than they could ever spend, and profoundly bored. It's played as a small character detail, but I think it might be the most honest moment in the film, because time without limits might not feel like freedom. So, what if you could buy time? Honestly, I think we do exactly what we do with every other resource we've ever turned into a commodity. Some people would have a lot of it, most people would have less than they need, and we'd all spend an enormous amount of energy arguing about whether that's fair while the gap quietly gets wider. The version of this that actually matters, I think, isn't the sci-fi one. It's the one we're already in. The time inequality that exists right now between people who can buy their way out of the task that eat a day and people who can't is already reshaping what a human life looks like depending on where you're born. We don't need genetic time currency to have the problem. In Time is describing we kind of already have it. And maybe the most useful thing this question does is make that visible in a way that's hard to look away from. Time is the only resource everyone starts with an equal amount of each day. What happens to it after that is anything but equal. I will give it a 4 out of 10 on the survivability score. The rich will be fine though. If time goes on sale, the species technically survives, it just quietly splits into 2 subspecies. The ones who can afford to keep going and the ones who can't. History suggests we'd probably let that happen, argue about it extensively, and then name a museum after the guy who made it worse. If this one had you staring at the ceiling a little bit, that was the plan. Subscribe if you want me to keep doing this to you on a regular basis. And if you want to go even deeper down this particular rabbit hole, watch this video about what if the dinosaurs never went extinct. See you there.